In the last episode, we began to explore the fighting in and around Viniard Field. We walked in the footsteps of Union troops under the command of Col Hans Heg as they advanced through the thick Chickamauga foliage. They would soon make contact with Confederate troops under the command of Brigadier General John Greg. Heg's men would soon begin suffering heavy casualties and were driven back towards the Lafayette Road. We also explored the actions of the 6th Florida Infantry as they charged across an open field towards an unsupported Union battery. The men of the 6th Florida would suffer heavily, but yet they advanced under murderous fire. But this was only a fraction of the fighting taking place in Viniard Field. Now, we continue our trek through Viniard Field and learn why this area was one of the bloodiest pieces of ground on the Chickamauga battlefield. So we're continuing our journey through the deadly Viniard Field here, and we're going to be walking in the footsteps of Hood's famed Texas Brigade. And we're going to find out if these hard-charging veterans from the Army of Northern Virginia have what it takes to break the Union lines here in Chickamauga. So we are in the general position of Jerome B. Robertson's famed Texas Brigade. Now they would emerge from the wood line to our right and begin their action in Viniard Field. Now before that, they were held in reserve a couple hundred yards in this direction here, where they can hear the fight, they just couldn't see it.
Judging alone from the sound, it appeared to me that every man of both armies must soon be killed or wounded. Quartermaster Sergeant Joseph Pauley, 4th Texas Infantry.
We remained there under a heavy shelling until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By this time, the Yankee batteries had about topped all the timber around us. The shells had kept every man as busy as a cranberry merchant dodging their flying fragments. Sergeant David Hamilton, 1st Texas Infantry.
Now, earlier in the fighting here, you had Hans Heg's Union Brigade advancing right into the teeth of John Gregg's entrenched 1,400-man brigade in Bushrod Johnson's division. Now, that fight would ensue in this general direction, and simultaneously you had William P. Carlin's Union Brigade positioned in Viniard Field here. So at around 3:30 p.m., Robertson's sections got the word that they were about to see action. So they began moving in this direction. As they got closer, they can hear the shells bursting in the trees and whizzing over their heads, and they would emerge from this general area here and be hit with a pretty destructive volley from Carlin's brigade, who is positioned in the field before us here. There's a pretty descriptive account from Private Lawrence Stefan of the Texas Brigade, stating that if the Union had shot low, we all would have been killed. The trees above were riddled with musketry. All that were either hit in the chest or head. So the Union soldiers positioned in the field here fired at Robertson's Texans, and they were aiming pretty high because all the soldiers that were hit in the chest and head. That's a pretty graphic description, and you can almost envision the men emerging from the woodline here being hit with that volley and all the other bullets hitting the branches and trees above the men.
It seemed that every third or fourth man in our line was cut down. Billy Carroll and Toby Riggs both fell not over 5 or 6 feet from me. We lost Doc Childers and Chisholm Walker. I suppose if we had stopped there and given the Federals time to reload their guns, they would have killed the rest of us. But we moved on them with loaded guns. Private James Polk, 4th Texas Infantry.
So now I moved into Viniard Field, where we just were in this general direction. You had elements of the 1st Texas and 3rd Arkansas began duking it out with Carlin's men who were positioned in the field before us here. Now in the tree line here, you had Hans Heg's Union Brigade engaging with Confederate forces, and they were beginning to pull back, suffering heavy casualties. In pursuit was the 4th Texas, and right over here is where Hans Heg was trying to rally his brigade when he would be mortally wounded, and the 4th Texas would be involved in some hand-to-hand combat in that general area there. And like we just touched on, you had the 1st Texas and 3rd Arkansas near this woodline here taking fire from a Union battery and Carlin's brigade position here, but they were also dishing it right back to the Union, who were exposed in this open field here. Now I'm just trying to set the scene here. Keep in mind, we have Confederate troops just to our front here, and just mere yards away you had the Union positions here. So think about just these two sides just duking it out against each other, and think about the carnage that was unfolding here, and think about the weapons used at the time. This is well within their effective range. So this is just a snapshot of the chaotic fighting and close quarter fighting here at Viniard Field. Now, a lot of things began to unfold simultaneously here. You had Carlin's brigade along with another Union brigade falling back in this area. Directly to our front, the 6th Florida would begin advancing directly at us on the camera here, while the rest of Trigg's brigade was moved to support Robertson's Texans in this general area. Now, once the 6th Florida was driven back, Robertson's Texans began to surge over the Lafayette Road just before us and make their way west of the Lafayette Road into West Viniard Field, which is where we're headed now.
Carlin's men gave way and came back in dreadful confusion. They were generally throwing away their knapsacks, in some instances, their weapons. They ran over us like sheep. Corporal William H. Records, 72nd Indiana Infantry.
So we have moved west of the Lafayette Road here, and Robertson's Texan Brigade began surging over the Lafayette Road, moving in this direction into what is known as West Viniard Field. And waiting for them would be the Lightning Brigade under Colonel John T. Wilder. His forces were positioned in this wood line here, and Wilder's men were sporting 7-shot Spencer rifles, and they also had a strong position at the base of the wood line here in clear fields of fire. So Robertson's Texans essentially marched right into the teeth of Wilder's Lightning Brigade. Many of the Texans taking refuge in this drainage ditch that you see before us here. Now, I believe at the time of the battle, the ditch was dry. I believe there was a drought in this area. But as you can see, it would offer some cover to the Texans here until they would advance into the field beyond, where the Texans became exposed. Now, once the 5th Texas advanced into the open field, they were exposed, and Corporal L.B. Dortch was struck in the temple, and he was instantly blinded in both eyes. Lieutenant Joe Turner rushed over to assist Dortch when a bullet would strike him, shattering his humerus. Wilder's Lightning Brigade lined the wood line before us here, pouring lead into the advancing Confederate infantry. They would begin slowly withdrawing back east of the Lafayette Road at around 5 p.m., and Robertson would send for reinforcements, and Benning's Georgia Brigade would answer the call and begin surging back into this area that you see before us.
We were here exposed, going in and returning to an incessant shower of grape and canister from a battery on the opposite side of the field. It was in falling back from this field to our original position that our gallant Rogers fell from a severe wound, and the regiment is thus deprived for a time of the services of one of its best officers. In this last charge, the regiment sustained its greatest loss in men and officers. Captain Tacitus Clay, 5th Texas Infantry.
So I'm currently making my way across what would be West Viniard Field here, and it's easy to see why the 5th Texas became exposed in this general area. I mean, it's completely open, and then you had Wilder's Lightning Brigade lining the wood line here. Now, if you recall, Wilder's Lightning Brigade was heavily engaged on September 18th of 1863 at Alexander Bridge. They were part of a delaying action, and between the tactics of Wilder, using them as mounted infantry, and their 7-shot Spencer rifles, they were able to withstand a much greater force and delay them greatly. And now Wilder's men have an extremely strong position, and you have exposed Confederate infantry advancing across an open field. And it just made for easy pickings for Wilder's men. Just offering another perspective of Wilder's position. Again, his men were along this wood line here and to our rear on the camera. And this is what the Texans and eventually Benning's Georgians would have to cross over if they would make it this far. But here's just another snapshot of the terrain here at Chickamauga. So we have essentially moved down to the extreme left flank of John T. Wilder and his Lightning Brigade's line here. And we mentioned that Robertson sent for reinforcements, and answering that call was Benning's Georgia Brigade. So now you had 2 experienced battle-hardened brigades with 2 experienced commanders assaulting this position, making their way back over the Lafayette Road and surging back to this position. But unfortunately, both of those regiments now met Wilder's Lightning Brigade, again positioned in the trees here. And you can't really see it, but in front of us is part of that drainage ditch. There's a lot of undergrowth, but just know that it kind of slopes down and then slopes back up, and that drainage ditch wraps around the field here, and this is where we came in. So again, now you had hundreds and hundreds of Confederate soldiers taking refuge in that drainage ditch. Well, Captain Eli Lilly with the 18th Indiana Artillery decided he was going to deploy a 2-gun section led by Lieutenant Scott on the flank of the Confederates here. And these 2 guns began delivering double and triple canister into the ditch here and just completely raking and obliterating anything in its path. And it is said that one of the soldiers here stated that hundreds of Confederates were in a, quote, self-made grave. So you can just imagine just dozens and dozens and dozens of men in this ditch here being hit with double and triple canister from these guns here. Just the carnage that was ensuing just in this general area here. Obviously, Benning's Georgians and Robertson's Texans could not withstand this, and they would pull back across the Lafayette Road and take shelter in those trees where the attack originally started from.
Captain Lilly moved forward 2 guns on the left to a position where we could take the ditch from end to end. Opened out with triple charges of canister down the ditch, which compelled the rebels to retreat in confusion. The ditch was literally full of dead and wounded, and proved to be a self-made grave for hundreds of them. Gunner Henry Campbell, 18th Indiana Battery.
It actually seemed a pity to kill men so. They fell in heaps, and I had it in my heart to order the firing to cease to end the awful sight. Colonel John Wilder, commander the Lightning Brigade.
Following Benning's failed attack, a fresh Union division arrived under the command of Brigadier General Philip Sheridan. As darkness approached, 2 Union brigades pushed into Viniard Field to recapture George Estep's guns and drive the Confederates back. They rushed through Wilder's position chanting, "Make way for Sheridan." Estep's guns were recaptured, but heavy Confederate fire from the woodline stopped the Union troops in their tracks. As Sheridan's men pulled back through Wilder's lines, Wilder's men jokingly jeered, "Make way for Sheridan." After hours of fighting, the ground around the Vineyard farm was littered with dead and wounded from both sides. Riding among the destruction, Brigadier General William Carlin experienced a personal loss.
Oh, my poor horse waited for me to dismount, then lay quietly down in the dusty Lafayette Road and died without a struggle. Removing the saddle, with the help of one of my men, I seated myself upon it, and then gave way to a long, hysterical crying spell, which I could not stop till I had it out. Brigadier General William Carlin.
So by 6 p.m., a frustrated John Bell Hood would order all of his men back east of the Lafayette Road to dig in for the night. And with that, fighting here at Chickamauga would begin to die down come nightfall. Or will it? You'll have to tune into the next episode to find out.